What are some unexplained mysteries of the sea? Story 1. We hear the last words people ever say far too often. Distress calls are fairly common, and there's nothing to do but tune in and listen to what's going on. Lunch, see if you are able to provide assistance. Heard a mayday off Cape Cod recently, where the captain stated his coordinates and that he was abandoning ship. Coast Guard scrambled the search party, but by the time they got out there, it was too late. Also posted this before, but sort of relevant. When one of those huge shipping containers falls off a cargo ship, they'll float just at the waterline, so they aren't visible until you're right on top of it. Imagine being in a wooden boat way offshore, making hull speed, and coming so close to it, you can read the numbers on the door. Had a few near misses out there with that kind of stuff. Story 2. There is this guy who basically sails around the world. He takes people on and charges you something like $30 per day with a minimum of a month's stay. But that money goes to paying any docking fees and buying food and supplies for the boat, so it isn't a bad deal. So a few years ago, I met him in Cape Town for a 2-month stay. Toward the end of the trip off the coast of Mozambique, we sailed past a dingy with a bunch of discarded AK-47s and pistols. Didn't see any blood or anything, but an empty boat with a bunch of guns left us feeling uneasy. Story 3. I used to work on the fishing boats in Alaska. I have seen green water come over the third-story wheelhouse windows on a 150-foot boat. Not white water or spray, solid green water, bucking into 40-plus foot seas. Sometimes the rhythm gets off and you stab into the next one instead of slapping the face or riding the back of the last one. The boat will kind of creak and roll a little as it sheds the water and comes back to the surface. Next time you watch The Deadliest Catch, note that there are seat belts on the wheelhouse chairs on a boat 4 times the size of a large house. I have also been charged by bears. Big weather is way scarier. Story 4. I opened the hatch to walk out of my workspace and was immediately halted by security. A sailor was being transported from his workspace to the brig after allegations, later proof, of a ridiculous amount of adult content on his external hard drive. I can't remember how much, but this was the day of 64 gigs being like, whoa, oh, a lot. Really strange. A coworker worked as a brig guard and was very uncomfortable since we all worked with the jailed sailor to some degree or another. Story 5. I'm a Marine veteran that was stationed aboard an LHA, decent-sized ship, in the Indian Ocean in 1994. I had an office on the back of a truck down in the well deck. We were in a storm, and there's this large porthole in the side of the ship. It was stuck open and we were taking in some water. There were sailors tied to ropes swinging around, trying to get the door to close. It was a bit disturbing to see these guys swinging around on ropes banging into the sides of the ship and water splashing in. The situation seemed desperate, but these guys eventually handled it. I got to my office and got my FAP on, though. Story 6. We sailed from Galveston to West Africa on a bulk ship filled with relief food, rice, beans, and vegetable oil, to deliver to underdeveloped locations. We made a stop in Guinea-Bissau, where we offloaded a portion of our cargo. Before we could finish, we had to move out at anchor while we let another ship come in our place. After 3 days at anchor, I started to hear loud noises while on the stern of the vessel, like a hammer on the hull of the ship. At lunchtime, I didn't think anything of it, because there is always work being done during the day. But after dinner, the noise started to really catch my attention. A few of us gathered together to track down this sound, which eventually led us into the steering gear room. We almost immediately realized the sound was coming from right under the rudder inspection hatch on the deck. This hatch leads to the outside of the vessel and has a ladder which you can climb to do inspections and maintenance on the rudder. We decided to remove the hatch with an impact wrench. Underneath was a little African dude who installed his own little hammock, along with some jugs of water and food. The poor guy wanted to hitch a ride back to the US. Unfortunately, had he been down there when we departed for the next port, he would have surely drowned. Story 7. I sailed on a general cargo vessel up the River Plate in Argentina to pick up a cargo of pipes to deliver to Italy. The village was tiny and along the banks of the river. The pipe foundry was also right along the river. What was weird was that the foundry flew the Vatican flag. The pipes all had seals embossed with labels in Latin. We went into the village while they loaded the pipes overnight, and all the villagers were telling us about how the foundry used slaves and how no one knows anyone that works there. They didn't know what went on in there and didn't want to screw with the church. Why was there a Vatican pipe foundry in the middle of the jungle? Weird. Story 8 was sailing on a U.S. Navy ship in the Indian Ocean in 1992. I was above the signal bridge looking at the setting sun through the big eyes, huge binoculars, to see if I could catch sight of the green flash. Right as the final rays of the sun went over the horizon, I viewed this brilliant green flash of light for the first and only time. It took me by surprise, even though I was looking for it. It was an emerald green fluorescent color and really lit up my view. I replayed it over and over in my mind's eye to confirm in my mind that it was real and I had actually seen it. Can still picture it 23 years later. Google green flash images to see what I mean. It is a very rare special atmospheric phenomenon that I had read about in Scientific American Mag. In high school, before I sailed the ocean blue, Story 9, I went to a maritime school for college every year. We sailed on our training ship for 6 weeks around the Caribbean. I saw a lot of cool things over the years, but I'd have to say the most amazing thing I saw was the green flash. For those of you who don't know, the green flash occurs on very clear days just as the sun is setting. The last sliver of the sun sinks below the horizon. Sometimes, if you're lucky, it will flash a bright green light right at the edge of the horizon. You have to use binoculars to see it, but it's a really neat phenomenon. I have been lucky to see it twice on the same trip, but as I work in the industry now, I haven't seen it since. I feel lucky to have seen it, though. It was one of those rare things in nature only a handful of people have seen. Story 10. Serving on HMAS Tobruk, which was a tank landing ship in the Royal Australian Navy. It had a tank deck that ran from the bow to the stern. In heavy seas, you could stand in the stern area of the deck and watch the ship twisting as it worked its way over waves. Also served on HMAS Torrens, late 80s up in the South China Sea doing a refueling at sea on the edge of a hurricane. Had two Rouge wave steps over the bow like it wasn't even there. We lost 4 guys over the side as a result, did an emergency breakaway from refueling, and had all 4 back on board within 10 minutes. All were injured, and the impact of the waves cracked the superstructure away from the deck at the front of the superstructure, behind the gun turret. Had to head for Hong Kong to get the injured guys treated and to fix the damage to the ship. Story 11. What I found most disturbing is only hearing one side of a rescue conversation. We were about 1,000 miles away from land. Closest land was the Falklands, and heard a rescue helicopter talking to a ship, probably a foreign fishing vessel, about a sailor they were going to airlift. There were severe language issues, so we heard the very British pilot slowly reduce the complexity of his questions, until eventually he was asking, "Is man breathe? Is man blood? Is man dead?" The reason we could hear the helicopter, but not the vessel, was because of their altitude and superior transmitter. Sobering stuff to hear in the middle of the Atlantic. Story 12, I got a UFO one. Makes me scratch my head to this day. I was in navigation in the U.S. Navy, stationed on an LHD, basically an aircraft carrier for the USMC Harriers and Helos, rather than Navy aircraft. A lot like the Marine in this thread, fapped to a bunch of sailors on, and working the night watch. A couple hours into my watch, we get a report from our forward lookout that there's an air contact moving erratically. Now our lookouts tend to make mistakes with air contacts, since they usually just called in the approximates, and we got with Ops to confirm on radar. Ops has nothing on radar, which is odd considering we tracked all air contacts. So as we contact the other ships in our group to see if they're running night flight ops, I head topside to check it out myself, since I'm a little better with it than most of the lookouts. There was indeed something in the air moving in ways that I can't explain. The speed was way too fast to be a helo, but the movements, nearly doing a 180 instantly to go back, were not consistent with any aircraft I'd ever seen. We watched it for about 10 minutes as it zipped around the night sky from a distance before it shot off into the night faster than I could believe. No clue what it was, and I checked every aircraft I'd ever heard of. Story 13 CVN 71 on our way back stateside from the Med. I was on watch at the port fantail. We were making nearly 30 knots for a while, and from what I was told by some officers on bridge watch, is that crap gets wrapped around the prop shafts after going for a while. So you throw it in reverse and let it all shake off. This happens when I'm on the fantail, from a head full, and we quickly come to a halt and start backing water. Spray is coming up over the deck. This is like 30 feet above the surface, and I hear loud thuds from the middle of the fantail deck. I get up off my butt and look through the hatch to see huge chunks of what I assume to be dolphins rolling around the deck. I can only guess some dolphins were following us pretty close and didn't get out of the way in time once we started going backwards. Poor Flipper. Story 14, I work on a platform off the coast of Italy, and we sometimes need to inform the Coast Guard about refugees. Creepy wise, though, there is a ship in the international dock that was crewed by Africans. They mutinied, took the ship, and sailed it to Italy to get refugee status. They got rejected, not sure why, and they have been slowly trading parts of the boats with the locals in exchange for food, and they haul away their crap. The ship is covered with signs written on blankets and poop about their situation. Story 15. This is going to sound unbelievably fake, but I was sailing with my brother just off an island a few hours down the coast from Melbourne, Australia, and my brother and I found a severed human wainer. We scooped it up, took it to shore, and called the police. Turns out the wainer had been cut off by an angry spouse, and the man passed afterward. The wainer was dumped in the ocean and had washed over to where I was sailing. Washed approx. 7 kilometers from the original location. Pretty freaky. Story 16, I'm a U.S. Marine that deployed with the Navy. The strangest thing I saw was on the 4th of July in the Gulf of Aden. I was going up to the flight deck to watch the fireworks show and got yelled at for leaving the door open too long and not having light discipline. Let that sink in for a second. Yelled at for not having light discipline before we lit up the sky with tracer rounds and flares. Sometimes I feel like U.S. sailors are just told something once, and they keep doing it regardless of how stupid it is, in certain situations. At least Marines in their leadership are usually disgruntled enough if something gets too stupid. They'll say, this is dumb, but for whatever reason, some person with an eagle or stars on their collar wants this, so just grin and bear it. Sailors just go along with it like robots, and when something is questioned for its stupidity, they just look at you like, does not compute. Story 17, I was active duty U.S. Navy for 9 years and did 3 deployments to Iraq. I was on my deployment in 2005 to the Mideast, Gulf of Oman, and was the ship USS Ogden LPD-5 responsible to protect the 2 oil platforms from Iraq. We were just sitting between the 2 platforms. A little about those. Abbott and Kaot. The platforms were oil pump stations to fill tankers from a pipeline down to the water. The one was in good condition, ABOT, while the other was in crap condition, COT. All blasted up like Swiss cheese from Iran. They tried to say they owned it, like me planting a flag in your yard and telling you to leave. So anyway, I was out for a smoke, and then all of a sudden, a big boom. I look at COT, and there is the thickest black smoke blocking out the sun that I have ever seen. The alarms go off, set GQ, I run to my place. So, I was the person in charge of the teams for firefighting in Rep 5 and away rescue response missions. So basically the guy in charge of firefighting and helping. Story 18, probably fog. I have 2 reasons why I say this. Firstly, when I was out at sea fishing with my dad, we noticed lots of boats heading inshore. Then I noticed the horizon was fuzzy. Next thing we know, 15-ish minutes later, there's a wall of fog about a half a mile off. We're 2 miles from shore. Within 20 seconds, it was upon us. We couldn't see anything. Boats occasionally appeared about 15 meters away from us when we got close to harbor. The only way we knew where to go was to follow the waves that were heading inshore. It was very strange, quiet, and disorienting. The second was at a dingy sailing event in Scotland. We were about 3 miles offshore, about 300 of us. There was very little wind. It was talking forever. The tide was pushing us back, as much as it was forwards. They only kept the races going, so we stayed together as a group and didn't get dragged off in the tide from pissing about. But then a load of fog came over, and I couldn't see anything. They still kept the race going in the hope we stayed close to the course, while the safety boats tried to round up everyone going the wrong way. Next thing I know, I'm at the first mark with 2 other people just in front. As soon as the first goes round, we hear the sound signals for race abandon. Basically, they didn't want people sailing with the tide, so when the person went round the mark, the called off the race and rounded us all up, meaning I was in third out of a fleet of 100, which was first. About 5 minutes later, a huge gust of wind hit, about 30 miles per hour, above the 5, that is, was before. Then after about a minute of that, the fog lifted and the wind died, revealing about 200 capsized dinghies and lots of confused sailors and panicked safety boats. It took nearly 3 hours after that for the last few boats to arrive back at shore. Story 19, I'm on the sailing team for my high school, and we sail on Lake Michigan. During our fall season 2 years ago, a Northwestern student went missing. 3 days after he went missing, we were sailing into the harbor where we de-rig, and we saw this thing floating in the water. It's the missing student, bloated and green. 911 was called, and the kid was confirmed dead. The next night, me and my friend were hanging out in a wooded area by the harbor where the student was found. When we left the forest area, there was a northwestern amulet slowly swaying on a tree branch. Scariest crap of my life. Bonus, there was a rumor that the northwestern student was assassinated by a cult called the Smiley Cult. They end students that are the top of their class and then put a smiley face on a tree where the incident occurred. There was a smiley face on a tree at the harbor, but it was cut down. Story 20, Fognados. In 2004, I was stationed on the USS Wasp. We went out on one last workup prior to a deployment, and we were out around the Gulf Stream off of Norfolk. A very strong cold front had pushed through the night before we got underway, and had some cold Arctic air with it. The Gulf Stream was warm enough that it actually created some small cumulus clouds that effectively mirrored the location of the Gulf Stream. When that cold air moved over the warm water, it caused sea fog. Cumulus clouds are an unstable cloud and cause air to move upward, convective currents. The fog was drawn upward into the cumulus, and it looked like it was a fognado. I wish I had my camera with me at the time. Cell phone cameras didn't really exist back then, because it was one of the coolest things I had ever seen. Story 21, I can remember being somewhere around the Falklands, and it was very rough when the man overboard alarm went off. Ran up to the bridge to help look for the victim and couldn't see anyone. A real sense of panic started to take over me, as I knew someone out there wouldn't last long in the conditions. Turns out the swell sent the ship up and down in such a way that it collided with the waves so hard that the man overboard alarm on the focal was activated. Q very relieved the ship's company. Story 22, I've spent a majority of my life fishing in Alaska. I've seen strange things a lot of times. I lean more towards funny strange because, well, that's just the way I think. My dad caught a 20-ish pound. Halibut and a much larger octopus had decided that it wanted the halibut instead. Brought it up to discover the tussle. My mom lost her rod and reel one day overboard. A friend of theirs actually caught it and brought it up the next week. Yes, it was the same rod and reel. My father used to custom make rods and would put people's names on them before sealing them, unless there was another fishing rod with my mother's name written in my father's handwriting. Story 23, ex-Sea Scout here. I once sailed between many of the Channel Islands off the coast of California in a 49-foot boat with friends. I saw plenty of things: bison, whales, luminescent plankton, a decapitated sea lion, and a pod of dolphins stretching as far as the eye could see. Then one night we were anchored off of Anacapa Island. We had anchor watches throughout the night, but the schedule got screwed up and my bosun and I ended up deciding to just take the rest of the watches to prevent it from getting any more screwed up. It was while we were on watch, we began to see the ocean beneath us go from deep blue to a near cayenne, in a circle that reached 10 feet off of any direction of our vessel. We had both seen luminescent plankton before, and this was nothing like that. It stayed like that for a good 20 seconds before it began to fade away. We didn't have any explanation. Then minutes later, it all happened again. Then a third, and then a fourth time. The fifth time it got brighter than any of the previous, and it got brighter and brighter until all of a sudden, tiny fish began jumping out of the water. It turned out to be a huge school of tiny fish with silver scales that were reflecting the moonlight as they came closer to the surface. Not a dangerous situation, but it had my bosun and I scared and mystified for a minute. The rest of the watch went fine, and the adventure was something I'll never forget. Story 24. I watched a lightning storm in the North Sea from the accommodation barge I was on. There must have been 200 strikes in the half hour I watched it. I'd never seen lightning touch down before, and to watch strike after strike, some of them no further than 300 or 400 meters away, was both exhilarating and terrifying. Doubly terrifying, considering we were parked next to an oil platform. Good times. Story 25. Sailed through the Bermuda Triangle in 2007. Both the first mate and captain said they saw lights coming from the ocean going upwards into the sky. I'm not sure if it was hallucinations caused by sleep deprivation. They were pulling long shifts, sailing through a nasty storm. It seemed weird that they both said they saw a similar sight on different watches. We made it to the Caribbean and surfed the same waves that had beat our catamaran up,